Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Clark Woodard, and my honors research project is Trade Liberalization and Three Dimensions of Development. Before I begin, I want to thank my thesis advisor, Jane Horvath, and also Jay Stewart, who was instrumental in helping me with the statistics. All right, so before I get into the stats, I want to discuss what trade liberalization is. Basically, that is the removal of tariffs, which are taxes on either imports, goods going into a country, or exports, selling goods outside of the country, and also removing other barriers like quotas, which restrict the amount of imports that people are allowed to buy. And I want to define economic development. The three dimensions that I mention in my title are growth, income distribution, and poverty. A lot of attention has already been paid to growth. A lot of studies have measured the amount of trade that a country has versus how well its gross domestic product performs, and most of these studies have found a significant positive relationship. Not as much attention has been paid to income distribution and poverty, so that's what I wanted to focus on. Now, my measurement, the dependent variable, the variable I'm looking for change in, is the SURF index, which stands for Social and Economic Rights Fulfillment. This is an index that measures people's access to food, their access to housing, education, healthcare, and fair working standards. And it measures these outcomes based on how large a country's economy is. So if two countries have the same level of performance on these indicators, then the country with the smaller GDP gets the better score because it was able to fulfill as many rights but with fewer resources. And then the independent variable that I'm looking at is the Trade Freedom Index. It comes from the Heritage Foundation, which is a Republican think tank. It's not an ideal source of data because it is biased, but there's not a lot of other organizations that are looking at free trade and comprising an index that combines both tariffs and non-tariff barriers. So because of that, I was forced to use this data. And also, I wanted to use the free trade index because other studies have looked at the amount of trade shares mostly, the amount of imports plus exports divided by the gross domestic product. But this looks at a country's policies rather than the outcomes of trade. So my research design is a regression, which is just a model that runs a best fit line through many points on a scatter plot. This is just an example, and it tells us the direction of association and the strength of that association. The limitations of my study are that one, with regression, it's very difficult to prove a causation. It's easier to disprove because if two variables are not associated or if the association is insignificant, then you can pretty much say one is not causing the other. But even if they are associated, there could be intervening variables. So it's really hard to prove that one thing is actually causing another. Also, the direction of causation is difficult to prove. Is X causing Y, or is Y actually causing X? It's a big problem. And also, I don't have data available for every single developing country, so my sample just includes the countries that I have data for, which means that my results are not generalizable. The output from the first regression model shows that trade freedom is statistically significant. So you can see the p-value is 0.014. The standard for statistical significance is anything under 0.05. So other variables, you can see GDP is actually negatively associated with SURF, but that direction only occurs when you add in urban population, probably because those two variables are related. Because if you just look at GDP with SURF, there is a positive association. So the question after looking at those results is, why is trade positively associated with surf? One possible explanation is the Stolper-Samuelson theorem, which is that as countries increase their trade with other countries, they tend to specialize more in the production of goods that use unskilled laborers intensively because they have a higher proportion of unskilled laborers than their trading partners. And this causes the demand for unskilled laborers to increase, which then raises wages for unskilled laborers. So that's the main economic explanation. An alternative explanation is that as developing nations increase their openness to trade, they provide the developed world with a cheap source of labor, and the developed world incentivizes this by providing aid as kind of a carrot to encourage liberalization. So the aid may actually be causing the surf index to improve and also causing developing nations to liberalize. So to test this hypothesis, I added a measurement of development assistance from the World Bank. And as you can see, the coefficient is actually negative. It's also insignificant. It's sort of close to significance, but it's not. The fact that the direction of association is negative seems to indicate that instead of foreign aid causing higher surf scores, it seems that lower surf scores attract more aid. And basically, aid goes to the countries that need it more. So the direction of causality for this is incorrect. And also, when you include this, the trade freedom variable becomes more significant. So I was not able to find evidence for that hypothesis. Another possible explanation is something I call international socialization. This I borrowed from sociological theory. If you can think of an individual as we mature, we tend to become more accepting of the dominant social norms that we see in our society. And I was thinking, what if countries kind of go through the same thing? As their governments mature, they become more respecting of human rights, they're more capable of fulfilling economic and social rights, and also they may be more willing to engage the international community and to meet international standards. And since one of those standards is trade liberalization, it's possible that developing countries just become open to trade as they increase their surf score because they want to fit in a way. So I tested this by adding a measure of political development, which comes from the Freedom House Index. The coefficient is negative, but that's because Freedom House Index has a reverse score system where a higher score means worse political development. And it's also insignificant. As you can see, the p-value from trade freedom, it does increase, which implies a decrease in significance, but it's still below 0.05. So I don't have strong support for this hypothesis, although it's possible that this might explain some of the variation. So what we've learned is that I cannot disprove the theory that trade liberalization causes development within the sample nations, but as I mentioned before, I have a lot of data limitations. There's only 70 plus countries in my sample, and there's still other possible intervening variables that I haven't looked at, and there may be other ways to measure the variables that I have looked at that may produce support for alternative hypotheses.